that will have, you know, longer term changes that we maybe want to sort of put into, you know, a more substantial review. And so the way that's going to work, just, you know, from as far as, you know, CDCAC's involvement and staff's involvement, the sort of more minor tweaks, we think those are things that we can like we do every year, implement relatively quickly into our next NOFA, which is, you know, comes out in July. The longer term stuff is are things that we think we need to sort of take a little bit, you know, more time to review and look at how different jurisdictions do it, maybe different NOFA grant processes in the county are doing it, and kind of come up with recommendations that will be sort of reviewed by CDCAC and then, you know, will be implemented for the 2027 NOFA, so the one that will go out next year. So just keep that in mind as we're having the discussion. Like, if you're making a suggestion, where does it kind of belong in sort of the review scope? So does anyone have any questions?
But our next review is 2026. Okay.
Yes, and that starts in that NOFA typically goes out the first week of July. Any questions?
Just maybe to echo what Kaylin just said and kind of maybe add a little bit. Like, I think those of you who have done this process before, we do this every year, the like initial debrief, and I would say we have a pretty good deal of say in those kinds of things. Like, we can make recommendations for like what might make things easier, what might be more clear in the NOFA, you know, small things, right? I think the kind of second bucket that Caitlin was mentioning are much more of like the big picture and sort of stepping way back, right? And I think we can make any recommendations, but it sounds like this will be a bigger decision-making process that will involve sort of, like you said, seeing what other review processes look like, getting sort of taking a bigger picture look and sort of maybe evaluating is too strong of a term, but, you know, so I think we can make recommendations and kind of in the rethinking of that, but it's sort of a bigger effort.
Yeah.
In that process, at the end of the time that it's given to the long-term changes, is that something that has to be approved by the county manager, the county board, or the staff itself? When that occurs, I know I'm talking, but how is that going to work out, Caitlin?
Yeah, as far as the approval process, you know, I think, well, I don't know, Jennifer, what do you think about that as far as who approves?
I think that's a great question, and it sort of depends on what the thing is. I mean, if it's just about the process, that's really, you know, up to us, I think. If it's about sort of how recommendations, if they're different, I mean, I don't know if we want to tackle this, but we always sort of go back and forth about, do we fund more things for more money? I mean, if we want to look at that kind of stuff, I would think we would definitely need buy-in from the county board and county manager on that. But if it's like a different NOFA review process, I would think we would want to run it by our leadership. But you know, I think people have a lot of faith in our process and the work that you all do and the work that staff does. So I think, you know, I think if we came up with solid recommendations, it would really kind of be on us.
Right.
Okay.
And we might decide that we have like the perfect process. I mean, we're not saying we have to change everything. We talked about, you know, we have some new folks who've had some good suggestions. We haven't really looked at like the whole big thing in a while. So this is a good opportunity to do that. And also because, as you all know, the county just did that race NOFA thing and they've completed the process. So we have a debrief scheduled with the staff of that. I want to say next week, Caitlin, maybe. So we're really interested in like lessons learned because their process was pretty different from ours. So what did they think worked and didn't? And so I think that might be an opportunity to incorporate some of their stuff as well, or not.
And unless this has changed, it sounds like there might be an opportunity for like some folks on the committee to kind of volunteer to talk about this a little more in depth, or, you know, compile recommendations or something like that, some sort of.
Yeah, I mean, those are the types
Yes,
of
please.
recommendations we're looking for from you guys. Like, if you think that there needs to be like a subcommittee of CDCAC to sort of look through, and if anyone wants to volunteer, we can absolutely do that. What exactly that process would look like, I think we'd have to figure that out. But yeah, I mean, I think we want you all to be as sort of involved in the sort of what should we be looking at as much as possible, because you guys do a lot of work and it's all volunteer work. So we want to make sure that this process meets sort of, and you guys have all been, like a lot of you have been doing it for a long time. So you have a lot of experience with the process, and we want to make sure that it is still a good process, and there's always room for improvement.
Caitlin, and in that note, if it is decided to go to a subcommittee, is that something that is already within the bylaws of the committee to do so, or it's something that you would have to amend to proceed?
I think we can create I mean, we don't currently have any, but yeah,
I'm
we
just
can.
curious in terms, because I know for the human rights office, it's in the bylaws.
Yeah, and if that's something that we need to do, say, you know, recommend a change to the bylaws to be able to do that, we could certainly do that, maybe vote on it at the next meeting or something, but yes.
But I think an ad hoc thing, I don't know that we need to get that formal. I mean, remember a few years ago, we did those focus groups was on the equity focus, and several of y'all volunteered and we just did it.
Okay.
I mean, if it's a standing subcommittee, I think that's what the Human Rights Commission does and some of our other commissions, but this would really be a come together for a few months, make some recommendations, and then dissolve, I think.
Yeah, in the housing, we do it as either a task force or an ad hoc.
Task force or ad
Subcommittee.
hoc, I love that. Let's do that.
And that doesn't need any formality.
Yeah.
And I do think, like, this conversation where we'll talk some today about the near-term changes for next year, small things, I think that's fine. The bigger picture, I think there is value in having more of an extended, multiple conversations over time so that we can really dig in and make some good recommendations.
Hi everyone, this is Chris. I just wanted to bring up the topic. I think this was something that I had mentioned before about how we can make it easier or streamline, a separate process for new programs for the county so that we can say, you know, we have a new nonprofit coming into the area. We don't know how well the work would be done, and we're able to kind of help them fund a little bit, but also gauge how well they would do in the future. I say this because I've been working with a lot of nonprofits who are new to the Arlington area, and they've been looking for funding. However, they've done fantastic programs, all from just volunteers and just small donations. And through the process, they were like, we can't find any funding because, first of all, you know, we're not under any radar, you know, the process, we don't qualify because it has to be for X, Y, and Z, and we don't know what needs to happen. And so I thought, well, maybe this is something that CDCAC can tackle, as we can have a separate application and money allocated or somehow, and say, for new programs, if you want to try it out, you're new to the area, you want to do good for the community, this is what we can offer.
Okay, so that's one recommendation. I think we've definitely talked about that before. Does anyone have any thoughts about that? Sort of.
Well, one question I wonder is whether that's more like a idea for a program that's like a departmental program that's sort of like a seed money I mean, that to me sounds more like a seed money program that's like microloans, you know, it's sort of along the lines of like microloans for, you know, new small businesses. This would be like microloans for new nonprofits kind of thing.
And Jennifer, correct me wrong.
Versus because with these federal funding sources at least, you've got so many requirements and such that it makes me a little nervous to go down that road.
It could also be an organization that operates just not in Arlington. So they're new to the county itself, maybe not new in its existence.
Yeah, but we've had those folks, I don't worry as much in our system.
Well, just making the
because we've had
distinction
that.
in Jennifer's notes, like there's new to the county, there's new
Right.
as an entity.
Right.
I believe, Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, that Biz Launch used to have sort of a nonprofit capacity building program that did just that. So Biz Launch is through Arlington Economic Development.
And that was actually funded through CDBG for a number of years. So it was a capacity because we had organizations come in that didn't have the capacity that we felt comfortable with federal funds, but we were able to move them to that. And it was like a whole organizational capacity building, and they had a cohort and they learned, board development and fundraising and all kinds of stuff. So it really helped them build their organizational sustainability. But again, that's looking more at the program than at the NOFA. So I have a process question, Caitlin. Are we going to actually look at like the merits of this stuff now, or are we just like brain dumping thoughts?
No, this is a brain dump exercise. And just to be clear, even if it's a great suggestion, there might be some that we're just like, yeah, we can't do this. So just keep that in mind that, this is going to be, these notes will be, we'll go back and we'll kind of come up with a process and evaluation structure. And I think everything should be on the table, but yeah, not everything will be implemented. And actually, just to take a quick step back, I did print a couple copies of the 2025 NOFA, and I should have sent it beforehand, and I apologize. So if anyone wants to reference it, it's right there. And I'm going to send it in the email. I noticed some people have their laptops, so you'll get it in your email in a minute.
Quick question. This may be redundant, but it would be helpful for me as a refresher of like, what is the underlying goal of the NOFA and the target audience? Because now we're talking about different target audiences today too. That would help me think through the updates and in terms of minor versus longer term. So yeah, what's the main goal of the NOFA?
So the goal is, I'll jump in, is as you know, we do our 5-year consolidated plan, which is the plan we submit to HUD that has our housing and community development goals. So we have 4 goals. So the NOFA is intended to solicit programs that help meet the goals of the consolidated plan. So in case you don't have those memorized, they're building and preserving affordable housing, preventing and ending homelessness, promoting, whatever the verb is, economic self-sufficiency, which is what a lot of our public service programs end up being, and revitalizing neighborhoods. So anything that fits within that and that that actually serves the income eligibility of the population, then that's kind of what we're soliciting. And Steve has patiently had his hand up.
Thank you. I think we just need to be, whatever we decide about new programs, we need to be more explicit, because sometimes in our discussions, we discuss that we want to give a little priority to something new that's promising. I think that we just ourselves need to collectively make a decision one way or the other. Are we or are we not going to give a thumb on the scale to a new project? And if that's true, I think the NOFA should say that. And then when we score it, we should have like a column, how many points for its newness or minus points for its oldness. But just to be explicit so that we don't keep talking about it each year in the evaluation without letting anybody know that that's really informally part of it.
Maybe there's an opportunity to like offer bonus points of some value for an organization that has never received funding, or whatever the group that we would want to potentially prioritize. It would mean that they still have to present a solid fundable application and then just get some bump up of bonus.
But that's assuming that we have made the decision that we do want to give a little extra priority. I'm not sure we've actually done that. We've discussed it, but do we in fact actually want to give a thumb on the scale?
We'd have to decide, and we'd have to decide define exactly what criteria we would want to prioritize. Yeah.
One small actual minor update for next year, the 2026. The organization description comes almost at the end of the NOFA. So for me, it would be more helpful to read like what the organization is, especially if they already exist and they're new. Like, what do you do? What is your point? And then what you're asking for. It just seems a little bit disjointed to read what they're asking for without knowing who the organization is first.
that's a good segue into the 4 categories we wanted to make sure to hit, which are NOFA structure, which I think that would fit, evaluation and review process, the presentations that we hear from folks, and the ranking and voting that we do. So just keep those in mind and we can kind of go through those. But if you think of something that isn't what we're currently talking about, feel free to chime in.
Well, so if the first category is NOFA structure, then I'd love to, I'm all about templates. So I'd love to see a template because one, I think if we're trying to help the applicants, then that makes it easier for them. And then it makes it easier for the reviewers because then there's more similarity across, how they, I mean, there's similarity already because they're presenting based on the same questions and stuff, but that's just me.
So can I ask a follow-up question to that? Would the template be like an example of a high scoring application that we've received in the past, or like what would the, so I guess I like the idea. I'm just trying to figure out like what exactly we would,
it could be like in the Zoom grants so that it's, I don't know quite how, like the technology side of it, but I would just think that would be nice. So, if that works. But then if we're asking, if we're asking them to give us their, numbers or something like that, it could be that they just fill in the numbers so that you're not wading through lengthy narrative to find data points, how many people in Arlington do you serve? How many did you serve last year? Those sorts of things.
So more like that, like in Zoom grants, they do have that, I think it's the program strategies where they're required to list out there, and then they have the program outcome. There's like a few tables. That come out
that's what,
there be more.
Yeah, that's what I'm all about, like presenting it in really easily consumable.
Zoom grant.
So particularly where we're talking about numbers or data, are you, and particularly because a lot of the questions we seem to ask in the presentations are, are you planning on serving more than you served last year? Are you, that sort of thing. Did you serve as many as you expected to serve? And, and then you can have the why not spot, but, I'd like to have my numbers just out there, right there, easy for me to see.
Yeah, so I like that idea a lot. I think it is going to be, in terms of the current system we're using, likely a system limitation. But we can try to figure out. Let me look and see how we can.
Yeah, and it
modify.
It might not be, but that's just
in
an ideal brainstorming world.
Yeah. No, and I think that's we could also add that to the maybe longer term column too, because there might be an opportunity for a system update at some point.
Now, is Zoom grant something that the county pays on a yearly basis, or you have a license eternally?
Oh, no, we have like a 5-year contract that we pay annually. So I see Wendy, and I think Wendy, I saw your hand first.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that the local government where I did CDBG work, we did have a standardized template. And I think for the folks who were on the committee and doing the review, it made it a lot easier. For staff, it made it easier because this is way back in the day. in a small community. And when the applications were submitted, we did initial vetting to make sure that the applications were complete. And the standardized form really helped with that. Of course, in a narrative, folks can extrapolate on all sorts of things about their mission, who they serve, how successful they've been, their story beyond the numbers. But I would also say that it makes the process more approachable for folks who are new to the application, because it just makes it super easy. And they can do an initial review super fast of the form and say, oh, yep, we would qualify, or we wouldn't, or maybe this is too much for us to tackle right now, but we can do it in future years.
Yeah. I like that idea. Steve, did you have your hand up?
Whether it's a form or not, would it be possible to have a word limit? It seems like consultant speak, there's a lot of text in a lot of these things that people might feel they need to provide the volume to justify, when a paragraph would have been much better.
So what's so funny is there actually is a word limit, and I've actually increased it over the last year at the request of applicants, because they're like, this isn't enough space for me, and so I guess
Okay.
it's like reading a I'm sorry. But yeah, no, we can reevaluate those word limits for sure.
I have a question about the long-term strategy, economic independence of the projects. So we have that question, but it doesn't seem like we always adhere to saying you've gotten this much money for this many years, we're not going to fund you. So like, are we going to keep asking the question that we're not actually acting on?
Does everyone think?
I mean, the answer is always when we say, what would you do if you didn't have the funding? We would serve fewer people, we would, and yeah, it always kind of.
Yeah, so like, about the question, act on
it. Yeah, let's definitely add that to the longer term. Hey, so, I think it's Chris. Okay, sorry, I couldn't see the name.
Hi, yes, I just had a question, comment, and opinion about the process. And I will say this, I don't remember correctly, but whether the applicants did their presentation near to the end of the evaluation period for us, where we would make a decision then in the following week or weeks, or if they did it at the beginning of the process. But my opinion and the thing I asked is, I did change my mind a lot, or I did have a better gauge after the presentations they did versus the application they put in. So I'm thinking, is there a way that we can, do the presentations earlier or kind of more in the middle time, and also allow those orgs to kind of correct information that they didn't have in the application later? And what I'm saying is, like, for example, Bugata is the perfect example I can think of, where their application I seemed was lacking, but their presentation was really good. And so how could we evaluate both and say, well, your presentation was good, your application was lacking, this is what you need to fix, because we need to have a good evaluation on everything.
Ooh.
I mean, technically,
I got a problem with that.
technically, it's not really how it's supposed to work.
Right.
Because we're supposed to evaluate what's in the proposal.
Yes.
The points are awarded.
Right.
The presentation portion, and I think this may be one of the suggestions, people have taken liberty with that and have turned that into more of a, less of clarifying and answering questions and more of amplifying, we'll say.
Yeah.
And it's really not how it's supposed to work, right? We're supposed to evaluate what's in the proposal.
Yeah.
It goes along the same lines of you got to submit it on time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
If you don't get it in on time,
right,
you're not supposed to evaluate it. If you don't have the detail about the program in your proposal, we're not supposed to consider it.
Right.
And that's how the playing field gets leveled. So, I mean, ideally, you're supposed to receive answers to clarifying questions, but when people come in and they run us through a slideshow, or they bring the students, man, it's great. It's really not supposed to happen. No, it's not how it's supposed to work.
Right, and I feel strongly about that with Tim. Like,
Because not
that's-
everybody can do that.
Right.
Not every organization has that same ability, and
But then we have the same issue of not everybody has the same ability to write a perfect grant.
Correct, but I think if you
I mean, I
have,
see everybody's
I think if you have a scored evaluation process, then that is what you use. If you want a more subjective evaluation process, then you get rid of your scoring and everything else because you're mixing apples and oranges if you use both.
so I mean, this really isn't that difficult. If you have a program, if you have an organization answering and there's really only 13, 14, 15 questions in here that actually require a lot of thought. And if you're not capable of doing that, I would wonder if you're capable of administering the actual grant itself on the back end.
Correct.
There's a capacity issue for me. I think we got a pretty fair, I would agree with Jennifer's comment on reorganizing it, and having the organizational information in front, then getting into the program, and then getting into the master performance makes a lot of sense to me. But yeah, this is not difficult.
Maybe not a popular path, so cut me off if this is a bad idea, but do we want to collectively establish a small handful of criteria, not written, but just like in our heads of what we are looking for when we are watching the presentation specifically? So that we're all kind of thinking about it in a similar way and kind of removing what we all, I'm sure, unintentionally fall into of like, oh, they showed pretty pictures and they brought, whole.
I actually was gonna suggest that we give them sort of a tighter parameters for the presentations
I mean, for instance,
and timeframes.
in federal proposals, you'll have, so what we could do is instead of asking 17 questions in here, you ask 13. And the 4 questions are to be answered orally in 10 minutes, right?
And
I think
we evaluate.
I think what happened was we had a great idea for this, right? Because they used to go on and on, and we would ask additional questions in the month, like it would be in here for like 20 minutes with a single presentation, and those were tough times.
Everyone answers the same 4 questions.
But everybody, and what happened was we wanted it moved to have only 10 minutes, but after we've seen these proposals over and over and over again, we have fewer and fewer questions.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, how do we fill the 10 minutes for these various programs, these various organizations that we don't have questions for, that we didn't have questions developed through reading the proposal? And that's when we got onto this, okay, we'll bring the kids and we'll have a whole presentation and it'll be a lot of pictures and that's great. But maybe a way around that is, and it shortens the proposal and the written portions. Maybe you have 4 questions that you have to answer in 10 minutes and you take us through that, like an oral presentation in our parlance of federal government.
So it'll become mandatory.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know you can't see me. Steve and I both have our hands up. I was going to say, I'd love to back up even further on the presentation thing and think through whether that's still helpful to do those. I know it's atypical for grant proposals to actually have the applicant presentation, and it adds a ton of time and it adds a ton of work for you and for staff and for the applicants. But, I do see the value of that. So can I add that to the list? Like even look at, do we want to continue to structure the presentations at all?
Yeah.
Well,
I've got to imagine if you get into that though, if you do it for one, you got to do it for everybody, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's either none, some or none, or I'm sorry.
Well, that's what I mean. Like,
or you could give presentations for any new organizations or new programs.
Just has to be uniform.
Yes, yeah, but it is really, I don't know, maybe Wendy can just opine whether they ever had one, but I've never run into another CDBG grantee that does presentations, truthfully. It was great for a new member to get to know all of the folks, but it is, once that's happened, it's less so.
Sure.
We did actually have presentations. The presentations were very, very brief because the community, it was the same thing, right? You had the usual suspects every year for the most part. They were very brief, and the primary purpose was to resolve questions that committee members had. I do have to say, though, that unequivocally, you have to come, right? We have to come up with a process that is fair and equal for everyone. It doesn't matter whether you've applied for 10 years in a row or you're brand new. You absolutely have to have a level playing field for everybody. And we need to ensure that we continue to think about that as we discuss this.
Could we give them the opportunity to like submit some kind of material along with their application that hits at more of that like touchy-feely piece that we get from the presentations instead? Can we have them
But they'll be
submit?
adding more work to the,
Yeah.
to the process of the application. And what we're trying to do here is
Yeah.
minimize it.
Well, I mean, I think there's ample opportunity if people are creative and good enough to do that.
Right, in the letters of support, like.
Letters of support, past performance section, we have addendums, right? I mean,
Yeah.
all of these proposals, the good ones, will have additional documents. And I don't know if there's a limit in Zoom grants as to the number of things you can submit. We asked them to submit an org chart, a 990, that has to be submitted, but there are additional things that they could submit that we could reference.
Yeah.
I'm personally a big fan of letter of recommendation, so if I don't see people recommending, it brings me like red flag.
Yeah.
Or Steve.
Oh, Steve, go for it.
Since we're supposed to be focusing on the written application, should we consider whether any oral presentation be limited to the questions we've asked? So we review the application, we then come up with any questions we have for clarification of the application, and that's what the presentation is. Just answer those questions.
Well, that's exactly how it's supposed to be. But I think what was happening was we weren't having.
We didn't have
That
questions.
the problem is that not all applications have questions. So you kind of get to like.
Well, then maybe we don't need presentations from all applications, so only those with questions.
Or we
Well,
establish.
but then you've just stopped the level playing field.
Right, and it would be headlines all over the county.
Yeah,
So.
Well, and I mean, I agree with Wendy that we need to be fair, both from an equity perspective, but also like staff spends a lot of time up front, like mapping out which applicants are coming when and inviting them. And so if we wait till I've done review, like, I don't think that would even work from a logistical standpoint.
It's true.
So what about, since we're talking about like from an equity perspective, we did those focus groups a few years ago. We've tried really hard to make sure that different organizations, you know, whether they're community-based or whether they're small or big, have sort of equal opportunity to hear about and apply. I mean, what are some things we can look at to make sure we do that better? Because I always worry about that.
What are you doing now?
Well, we could have more focus groups once every 3 years. I mean, the ones we did were excellent.
So something that they did with the race NOFA that I kind of thought was interesting was they did like, what do they call them? Like technical assistance workshops, where they kind of like went in and looked at a very specific element of the proposal, like say the evaluation criteria or demonstrating need, and kind of walked through exactly what you're looking for and kind of workshopped areas with applicants.
So you guys do that
I thought we did
once.
that.
We do one workshop, and it's,
You do like,
but we don't do like, it's not like a situation where folks can come in and kind of workshop ideas with staff. You know what I mean? Like I was not present at any of the technical assistance workshops. So if anyone was, please correct me. But my understanding was that it was kind of very hands-on.
So I actually talked to an applicant of that process, and she said she went to all of them, and she said it was sort of helpful, but it was also pretty overwhelming because she felt like she had to go to all of them, and it was a lot. So.
and how do you,
Well, I was just curious how we talked about these focus groups. How are we consistently getting feedback from the applicants? Like there's plenty of points we can from releasing the NOFA to them submitting the application to us actually giving the results? Are we getting their feedback during that process, and where does that go?
So we do applicant debriefs with everyone who requests a debrief. And that's an opportunity to kind of talk through what worked, what didn't work. We obviously do our workshop, we do a subrecipient training before the fiscal year starts. We have our needs hearings, which no one ever shows up to. But I mean, I think those are the typical, I don't know, Jennifer, Rolda, if you guys want to add anything to that. I mean, and we're constantly talking to, because we monitor our subrecipients biannually, and you know, so we're having conversations with them about their programs and how it's working, and you know, and a lot of times suggestions for application improvements come up, and we consider it. I mean, I don't think there's a formal process for them to weigh in on the development of the NOFA, but you know, those are some of the things I can think of off the top of my head.
Because those comments would be helpful in what we're discussing though too. Like if they were, after they get the money and you're just talking about that process, if they had comments or something, are those collected anywhere in a way that we can, like, you can see a pattern or a trend to see like, hey, this is something that seems to be frustrating to all of them? Like, does that exist as something to review, or is it pretty ad hoc?
I would say it's pretty ad hoc. I mean, the other thing is that we want to talk about ways to involve applicants in the evaluation process, like that is certainly something we can talk about doing, you know, like even just the sort of longer term, you know, evaluation. And, you know, I think we did those focus groups a couple years ago. We involved applicants in those. And I think it was helpful in some ways. So, yeah, I mean, I think in terms of developing the NOFA, I don't know that we've ever done that, Jennifer.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that would be interesting. We get ad hoc feedback all the time because, as Caitlin said, we talk to, you know, these are our community partners and we talk to them. And I mean, one thing we hear all the time is it's really long and burdensome, and like, given the amount of money it is, it's a lot. So we've tried to simplify over the years, but of course, again, given the federal piece and the compliance piece, so I'd love to look at that, like really, and we tweak it every year, but I'd love to really dig into that. Like, what do we really need to know? And this is where we would certainly want CDCAC to help us figure that out. Is there stuff we can cut out or shrink or make more? Because it's a lot of work for a $25,000 grant, you know, certainly compared to other grants that a lot of these organizations get, and they tell us that all the time. So that might be an interesting way to involve them in this conversation too.
And it could be even like a Google form, like just how did it go? Any thoughts, and then it exists as comments that don't just disappear afterward.
Yeah.
Well, we listen. It's not that they disappear. We just don't formally organize them. But
yeah. It exists. We can review it.
Well,
so Steve and Wendy both have hands up. Steve, is that an old hand or?
No, I did want to follow up on my last point though, but I didn't want to cut anybody off. Still trying to focus the presentations. When they come in and they spend the first 10 minutes telling me what was in their written proposal, that doesn't seem to be a good use of time, because I've read the proposal. And so if we want them all to come in, perhaps we could have one question in advance and tell them, when you come in, we want you to address this issue. So everybody comes in, everybody gets the same issue to address, and then we layer on top of that any questions we have. But again, so that they don't have to come in and start telling us about the global needs that they're trying to address and how many people are poor in Arlington and all this other kind of stuff, and stuff that if we've done our job, we've read the document.
Yeah.
well, that goes back to Tim's point of maybe putting, you know, 3 questions that aren't, or having a non-duplication between the presentation format and the application format.
That seems like it might be the way to go, because we actually provide them the written, if we have questions stemming from our read of the proposal, we provide that via Zoom grants, and then they are actually supposed to write a response. So actually presenting it is kind of redundant. So maybe the way to go is to have 3 questions that would normally be in the proposal be presented orally in that, if we decide that we want to continue to have presentations. Anyway, that might be the way to go.
And Wendy has a hand up too.
So I'm kind of laughing because this is a public meeting and it's being recorded, but I want to swear you all to secrecy because I told Maureen when she nominated me that I would sit quietly and listen, and I am not fulfilling my promise to her. But I will tell you that I work for a local government that was absolutely committed to design thinking. And we were very, very successful in amending processes by meeting with stakeholders and saying, right, how might we make this better? So part of that could be the committee, which is what I'm hearing is sort of limiting repetitive conveyance of information that's already in the application. But it's also asking the folks who apply, right? How might we make this better for you? Right? For some people, maybe they're going to be like, yeah, well, this is, we've done it so many times, we don't even think about it. But maybe for newer applicants, they could say, well, it really would have helped us if you'd done this and you'd done this and you'd done this. And then you pull together all of that information. So you do your best to amend a process to meet all of the stakeholders' needs, right? And staff is a stakeholder too, because staff puts in an incredible amount of time in this process as well. So I would just challenge all of us to just think, right, how might we make this better for the committee, but also for the applicants as well, although we need to be sure to engage them so that they tell us how it might be better as opposed to us speculating. And now I'm really going to try to just be quiet.
No, I think that's great, Wendy, that you spoke, talking, but we've also asked the community, we did that with the focus groups.
Yeah, but I think when maybe what Wendy's saying is building it in more systemically.
I've never heard.
Design thinking is like a continuous process, and you start with like, what is the root problem where actually the customer, I work in digital products, so it's like, what is the customer trying to do? So here, what are the applicants trying to do? And you actually ask them and figure out where are the impediments of them actually doing that. So for instance, length came up, like that seems to be something frustrating to them. So what do you do to reduce frustrations in the process so that they can reach their goal effectively? Because ultimately their goal is the money, like you said. It's long for the amount, so design thinking includes continuously hearing from them to circle back your hypothesis. Will this make it easier? And then you ask them, did it make it easier? If not, then you go back and try to do it again.
Do we have the time for that?
Well, I mean, going back, meaning like at the end of each NOFA cycle, you've asked them, how did this one go? And so that you take that into consideration for the next one, not that you're doing it.
Well, and I like the idea of maybe a survey, something, maybe something that.
Well, I'm wondering if there's a way to make it anonymous because, you know, oftentimes people aren't willing to tell their funders the total truth because you don't want to upset your funders.
You want to not get money.
Right, exactly.
We don't have that problem.
No.
Well, so that's where we get like an outside person to do it, or you all, or something. I don't know. Because when we did the focus groups a couple of years ago, we got some responses from organizations about things that were working really well. And those same organizations went to the county board and said, we need to do a whole new process because that doesn't work for me. So I agree with you. I mean, I think there needs to be a, and for some of them it's because they didn't get funded and they were mad, you know, so there's that. We have to recognize that. But I think it would be important to ask in a way that people don't feel like, you know, we're insulting our funders, or because we really are open and we really do want to make improvements, you know.
So I do think what would be useful is to clarify for the group exactly which of our 17 questions or whatever are dictated exclusively by the various funding sources. So like, for instance, you know, we know that the goals, the you know, CDBG, the boxes with the CDBG goals, that's got to be in there because that's required from the CDBG piece. But I'm not sure what of the other ones, I'd have to look at it more closely, but are precisely things that have to be in there from, and I don't know the the other HHS one as well.
CSBG.
Thank you. I couldn't get. So that would be helpful because then we can be thinking, because I do think that there are perhaps ways to, at a minimum, kind of maybe phrase the questions or like Jennifer was saying, so we ask about sustainability and we never get the answers that we're looking for. So I'm not willing to give it up yet necessarily, but maybe there's a way that we can phrase it that one last time that gets at exactly what we're looking for and is like shorter so that they're not going to just give us, well, you know, we'll just raise money elsewhere, you know, but say, I don't know, something to the effect of, just don't tell us that you're just going to raise money elsewhere. Like, you know, I don't know.
So on the goals piece of it, I understood that like they have to show that they are going to meet one or more of these stated goals. But like, is there a way to get them to focus in, as opposed to they check the boxes and then I get a narrative that is like, we are going to do goal 1.1, we're gonna, like, they just kind of rehash what they say they're gonna, which goal they're gonna meet, right? Is it more of a template kind of thing where there's a table with the goals listed?
Yeah, and they just check the goal.
Well, but I want to know
How exactly?
on each one, and so do the column header next to it say approach. What is your approach for meeting this particular goal?
Yeah.
So that it's not just a rehash of, because like, I've never seen a proposal come through that didn't meet at least one of these goals, right? Because they have to.
Because they have to.
So I don't need them to tell me that they're going to meet a goal. I need them to tell me how they're going to meet that goal.
Yeah, and that, I think, Jennifer, that could probably be a near term.
Yeah.
We could probably clarify that for, if everyone agrees that would be helpful.
And then another, sorry, Steve, just one thing that I thought of earlier. I don't think we ask them anything about their experience or capacity managing federal funds, like either these funds or.
Yeah, I think it's
other
organizational capacity. I don't have.
Oh, is it? Okay.
We do, and if they've previously gotten our money, can I go back to the previous one just for a minute? What you're talking about to me sounds sort of like a logic model. Like maybe, I mean, would that be helpful? So you pick your goal, but you also like, you know, you show the flow of how that. Here's the goal you're trying to meet. Here's the activity. Here's the outcomes. Because we get to it, but sort of a little bit more circuitously. I wonder if that could be like, and again, that could be more template-y, really, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I really like that.
I know you. Well,
all about a logic model.
Yeah, were you a logic model fan?
So the Race to Rebuilding Trust, NOFA, the applicants did fill out a logic model for that. I will say that as a reviewer for that, I found it to be a little cumbersome and hard to kind of, you know, because you're supposed to show like the inputs, outputs, outcomes, goals, like how it all kind of flows together. And well, I think as a reviewer, I found it a little bit confusing to see how everything kind of flowed together, but maybe it was just a flaw in the template that was provided as opposed to the content.
Well, and I'm not a like militant logic model person, but I do like the progression of seeing, like, if this is our goal, these are our activities we're going to undertake, and I like to see how they're tied to that goal, and then here are our expected outcomes and how those are tied to our activities.
Yeah.
Because and we have the question about evaluation, and then this is how we're going to measure those outcomes. And if those were all in a nice little table,
Yeah, no,
that would be
I agree.
awesome.
I guess my comment is more like maybe we should put it into the long-term column because I know that took a lot of training for the applicants, like just to understand what exactly, and some of them just like didn't fill it out appropriately at all. So I think we would need to kind of think through, like, again, our like the training process, like, are we going to be having like workshops? Are we going to be having like open office hours where folks come in and like, I think if we're going to do something like that, which, but either way, I like the idea too. I think it would be very helpful if it's done appropriately.
Steve's got his hand up.
It was said earlier that it's a lot of work for very little money. Long-term thinking. First of all, do we tell the applicants that we internally cap grants at 25,000 or whatever it is? And should we cap the grants? Looking at the other county grant program, our grantees were getting $100,000, $200,000, $250,000. I think we need to determine as a group whether we want to stick with sort of a very small cap or whether we're willing to focus more resources on fewer organizations. And I know that's a big discussion, but it's just something to put on the list.
I would just offer, I mean, that is consistently the thing. I don't know why we would try to, hamstring is the wrong way of putting it, but I'm lacking eloquence this evening. I don't know why we would restrict ourselves or hamstring ourselves or create reason to, because I think that would be something that we would have to elevate. A decision like, if we were going to make some sort of decision like that, or proclamation ahead of time, I think that there would be a lot of interested parties that would want to understand that. There would be a lot of oversight that comes with it. I don't know if it's worth it.
Yeah, that would definitely be something.
Well,
that
it's a
the
matter of
county board
transparency.
would need to weigh in on.
But shouldn't we just let people know what we're doing rather than sort of doing it behind the scenes? I mean, and if we have to stick it to 25, that's fine, but just tell people that.
Well, we do. I mean, we tell people what the limits are based on, on the type of project. I mean, that's in the NOFA. We do, for public service, though, we do allow people to submit up to 50,000, but you're right, we never fund them at 50,000. So maybe we don't even bother. I mean, that might be a.
Yeah, I guess that was my point, because we'd see requests come in at much higher amounts. And then, but internally we knew, oh, well, we can only go up so much. Yeah.
Because the applicants play a game too. They know what they're going to get. So they ask for double of it, knowing that we're going to knock them back down to 50% of that.
It's the used car mentality.
Good salesperson.
I think in terms of just the questions being asked, I know that I'm about to say something that involves having more questions, but there are a couple places where I think the question needs to be broken out into two separate questions. I think, like, describe your organization's demonstrated ability to carry out the program. To me, that's one thing. And if you've received community development funds in the past, describe the impact of prior year funding. To me, those are two different questions that kind of get crammed in to one thing. It may make it easier to evaluate and answer the questions if those were two separate questions with maybe a smaller board limit or something. Like shorter questions, but making sure that each one is a single. So there's that one, and then.
Laura, I'm sorry, can you repeat those two questions? I only got the first one.
Yeah, it's question number 16. It's the one under organizational capacity and past performance. Describe your organization's demonstrated ability to carry out the program is like the first part of it. And then I'm proposing breaking out the second part into a separate question. If program has received funding in the past, describe the impact that prior year funding has had on the community. To me, those are two very different things that should be separated. And then also that sustainability one. Long-term strategy and then plan for project sustainability, because I find that they focus on the long-term strategy, what we're going to do in a year, or what we're going to do in 2, and not on the sustainability and eventual economic independence, because that's a much harder question to answer. And by combining them, they kind of focus on the one.
That's a good point.
So if we pulled it out, we force them to answer it, maybe.
So there is, again, there's a system limitation on number of questions. So if we add, we're going to need to subtract. So just.
I wasn't going to tell them that, Jennifer.
What are we slashing?
I get it. We're like blue sky brainstorming, but we need a little reality here.
What's the system limitation?
I think the number of questions we have, right, Caitlin?
Oh, is it?
Can we? I don't actually know if we're at there.
We can go back and talk to Zoom grants and see if they've changed that, but it's been an ongoing fight, and
Or is there another question? Are there other questions that we don't?
I think that's a better.
Right.
Because capacity is different than past performance. Your organizational capacity speaks to different things than your actual past performance delivering a very specific program. It's two distinctly different things. That's a good point.
And then, or could we combine description of the organization? That's one question that exists, and the organizational capacity. Can we somehow combine those two that are more related?
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to see if there are any categories we haven't touched on. Ranking and voting. The categories of the buckets that we vote in, the process for dot night.
To Tim's point, if presentations aren't supposed to have any effect on and if people aren't necessarily answering the questions, can we have it so that we have to have the written questions, or else like we sort of lock that application? Because some people are probably going back and saying, oh, I love that presentation, let me go change my numbers. Like I know I've done that a couple of times, and that's not what you're supposed to be doing, because you're reacting emotionally to what is supposed to be on the paper.
But that is actually, I mean, we have it set up that way because whatever was in writing, perhaps they clarified or they said, so I think the idea is that you're able to change your scoring.
I think it was different when they were answering questions in the presentations related to the proposal. If we wanted clarifications of what was in the actual proposal, then but when they bring in somebody to talk about how this impacted them, that's fantastic. But it's not really fair to other organizations like, I was going to say Rebuilding Together, because they're not going to bring one of their housing projects in here.
Right.
Yeah. Show you the ramp that they built. I guess they can show you a picture of it, but that's a bad example. But I think you understand the point.
Maybe we shouldn't call them presentations, because they're not. We should call them Q&A session.
Words, yeah, semantic. It means things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Laura?
Instead of calling them presentations, call them Q&A session, or I don't know, something better than that.
Yeah. That's good.
How do you guys feel about dot night? Is it even useful? We used to think of it as, the scoring was sort of the merit of each proposal, and then the dot night was kind of ranking. But we've been wondering, is this like overkill? Is this helpful? I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's so far removed from hearing some of the presentations, because it's like 6 weeks or something. It would be more helpful to vote in the immediate outcome after some of the Q&As or something for me personally, than try to have to remember something that happened like 7 weeks prior. Like then I have to reread some of the proposals and like remember things that maybe I didn't. So.
Yeah.
We could consider doing like dot night by group,
Yeah.
maybe.
we're already grouping them together anyway.
Except for the staff, like,
Right.
it lets the staff catch up. Well, I mean, that's not meant meanly.
No, yeah, no, it's fair. I
Steve, you
think,
have a hand up.
I'm a big fan of dot night. I know theoretically, we're not supposed to be comparing applications. So you evaluate each application and you give them the numbers and so forth. But at the end of the day, I like the idea of being able to say, you know what, these are both good programs, but this one I think is more important at this point than the other one. So I'm a big fan of dot night. And I think that if for example, it had been proposed at one point, I think after each night we did a dot night, I would have a hard time, because as hard as you try to get everybody from a particular category into one particular night, it doesn't always work for the schedule.
Yeah.
And
Pragmatically,
so
evenings.
Yeah.
Ooh.
It's a wrap.
No,
yeah, our eyes are all.
I like
Yeah.
that.
Those are long days.
And I'm thinking of dot night as I'm doing my numbers, and each week I'm checking off sort of ones that I think are of particular note that I am probably going to dot later.
So you look forward to dot night with great anticipation. I love that.
Actually, I do. It's not as much fun as when we actually had the little stickers and you had to climb over each other. But it's much more efficient with the electronic version. And I am all about efficiency, so let's go with that and forget the fun.
I think there's a lot of merit in that.
No, folks we haven't heard from. Any other thoughts?
This has been one of the more robust conversations that we have had as part of a debrief. I mean, I don't recall ever having a discussion about not having presentations.
Juicy.
Controversial.
That is interesting.
It's been helpful
Q&A
to be able to
session.
think big and think immediate,
Mhm.
because it does, I think that does
Yeah.
get us
Yeah.
thinking.
Could I raise a post-dot night question? It's always, it's very, very impressive how much information we get from the staff and how organized it is. I'm very impressed. But this last time, I felt a little off when we received at the meeting the final list of recommendations. And looking at it right then, I need time to look at things and think about them. And so it would be very helpful to have that, even if it's only a day before, the list of here are the final staff recommendations and the columns of this is what they got last year, this is what they asked for, and this is what we're recommending. One of those columns wasn't on there this year. I forget which column it was. But those two things, one, if we could get it like the day before, and two, if we could have those three pieces of information so we could just, would help me focus and then ask questions about, well, why this, why that?
Okay. Yes, we can do that.
Now,
One thing we worry about too is, so back in the day, we used to share staff recommendations with you all before it was released as part of the county manager proposed budget. We're not allowed to do that anymore. So, we roll up, the recommendations, we try to, we incorporate everything, and then you don't see it again until March. So I don't know how to fix that, but I just was wondering how those of you who have been around a while, like, how does that feel? And is there anything we could do to, I don't know, like, we don't want to be not transparent.
Well, what is it?
We're not supposed, we
About
can't
that
share
last meeting.
draft manager recommendations before they're released by the manager. So we used to do that. We used to go to CDCAC, I want to say in January, and be like, here's our draft. So we can't do that anymore. So I guess I'm checking, do you all feel like it goes into a black box and you don't hear anything until later, or are you okay with it? And not that I have a solution either way, but just kind of curious.
Well, what was it that you actually did share with us then?
So what we share with you at Dot Night is scores, but we don't get into the money at all, because as we're always telling you guys, that's not your, we're the ones who sort of play with the money, do the recommendations. We go through the whole like county process. So you all don't actually see the recommended amounts until after it's publicly released.
I don't find that what's publicly released is all that different from what we.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, I think, how most processes work.
I think so. Since it's been a change in the last few years, I just wanted to, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, previously in January, like Jennifer said, we would go through the table, but show you the recommended amounts. But now we're not allowed to do that anymore. And so that. And
Oh, so is that why it wasn't, that column wasn't there January? Okay. Because it seemed different.
Well, we
that
can
there
share
there a
what was
piece missing.
funded last year, but again, we can't share recommended
Okay.
amounts.
Okay, so it was a change this year. Okay, thank you. I didn't realize it was a change. Okay.
I agree with Tim. This was a good discussion. A lot of ideas. I think you told us up front what's next. Would you repeat that?
Sure. So everything in the left-hand column, minor updates, those will be, we'll take those back. We'll kind of figure out how to incorporate those into the 2026 NOFA. We'll share the final version with you before it goes out in July. The longer term areas for evaluation on the right-hand side, we're gonna start thinking through a process, a structure for considering these areas of evaluation. There might be a subcommittee that we ask for volunteers to participate in. Likely the work won't start until after the 2026 review period wraps up. So it'll probably be November or December when we start, kicking off the evaluation process. But we want to have the structure kind of developed before then. So that's why we wanted to start talking about it now.
It sounds like staff is going to do a lot of thinking, going to get back to us late summer.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll have probably more information to share in June or September.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just on the long side, the idea of smaller groupings of applications being reviewed
Yeah.
by people didn't get lost.
Okay, Jennifer, add that to the list.
Just wanted to make sure.
So funny.
Since Tim got his happy, no more presentation.
I mean, that's a wild idea. I don't think I've ever
I know
considered that.
I know my idea was considered wild too. So just fun.
That's
Figured I'd
another,
put it out there.
that's another one that's I've never heard
Isn't that what the
But
race NOFA did?
that's interesting. I mean, one of the policies that we had was everybody had to review all of them in order to actually then rank. So would
Have that dot.
you not be ranking all 37, 39, 40 proposals, or would you only rank the ones you reviewed?
So I'll tell you how the Race to Rebuilding Trust NOFA groups did it. So what they did was each group reviewed maybe 8 or 9 applications, and then, and this was very difficult, but what we then had to do was each group had to come to a consensus on a score for each application.
That's how I'm familiar with.
So we would we met like 5 different times, and we had to talk through every single evaluation criteria, and everyone's score had to come to let's say that the range was 1 to 3. Everyone had to say, okay, let's give him a 2 for this. It was a lot. But I mean, but I think where that process missed was there was no sort of way at the end to bring everything back together. So I have no idea what any of the other applications looked like from the other groups. And I think that's a challenge that if we want to do something like that, we'd have to kind of work through that, because I think that we would want to make sure that if we're going to continue ranking the proposals based on priority, there has to be some understanding of what each application is proposing. And if you're not reviewing all of them, how do you do that? So, yeah.
Could you break them up by funding source? I know there is some overlap where you have different funding sources might apply to a particular application, but if there's a group that can only go to one funding source, separate them out and consider them separately?
I mean, I think we've tried to stay away from applicants applying for a specific source just because the eligibility is so specific for each funding source, and sometimes you don't quite get it right. But yeah, I mean, or maybe we group reviewers by category. Yeah, like housing programs or job training programs.
The category.
And maybe that's how you do it.
And the big category, you might have to have a couple of groups, and then you do have to have some sort of, and sometimes what you do is that then they sort of present their applications to the group so that, and vice versa, so that then when you do a ranking within that, there's, you know, some sort of appreciation for it.
Mm-hmm.
But the raw scores seem to sometimes just automatically sort of rank them naturally anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Anything else? Great. Well, thanks everyone. So yeah, we'll kind of take this back. We'll start thinking through the process. Again, if we have information to share in June, we will do that. I'll also share the NOFA for 2026 NOFA before it goes out. And yeah, thank you guys so much. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. I think you have a lot of chair updates.
I'll try to be fast. I attended an advisory group chair check-in meeting yesterday with the various advisory group chairs. There you go. Is this the
electronic meeting?
So there were a couple of items that came up. One of them is there is an updated, or will be updated, I'm not really sure the status, electronic meetings policy. The one thing I took away that is specifically different than what it has been is that there previously was the rule that, let me read it, we may hold an all virtual meeting, so everybody being virtual, twice per year or 25% of the meetings, whichever is greater. And it is now that we may hold all virtual meetings twice a year or 50% of the meetings, whichever is greater, which means that I think half of our meetings could be virtual, but the non-consecutive all virtual meetings thing remains the same.
Okay.
So we have to have a quorum and all that stuff.
Every other meeting essentially
Yeah.
has to be in person. We can't hold 2 consecutive virtual meetings. There were several other things that came up that raised quite a few questions, and the staff was going to go back and get clarification, so don't kill the messenger on this one. For purposes of a quorum, same thing must, I think that it's still the same requirement that there must be an in-person quorum for a hybrid meeting, but all members who are participating virtually must participate with their cameras on. It says here, quote, during the entire meeting. There were lots of questions about that, about when someone is presenting, whether everyone needs to be on camera for that, or whether everyone needs to be on camera only for a vote. There was a lot of question about that and no exact guidance. So
Laura, is that the state law or is that a county policy, the camera thing?
I think it is in the state.
Yeah, it feels like a
State
legislative.
policy.
That's like the most micromanagey thing I think I've heard.
So,
But my understanding was that was a proposal to try to get more hybrid meetings, so that if people were concerned about too many hybrid meetings, say, okay, but you have to be on camera. So it was a negotiated kind of thing.
right. And then there were issues about, concerns brought up about preserving bandwidth. If someone, you're trying to present and you're trying to be on camera. And
Oh,
so
that's true.
lots of questions came up.
Yeah,
So
and getting paid to use our internet.
Those were the key changes that they highlighted and I noticed.
So I think as far as the electronic meeting policy, if we want to adopt the new threshold, 2 meetings or 50% of the meeting, we do have to update this electronic meeting policy. So I printed it for you guys to, I mean, I feel like we would want to do that, but it's up to you guys. But in order to do that, I think we have to vote on it and then, go ahead, Laura,
Yeah,
sorry.
and,
Stealing
sorry,
your thunder.
no. We do, just to go off of what you just said, we must adopt an electronic participation policy at least once annually. So every year
Annually.
now, we have to revisit and
Every year.
adopt what exists if we, if we want, but, and that 50%, all virtual, we're not required to do 50%, it's just you can go up
Yeah.
to 50%. So, yeah.
So I think, do we want to, I don't want to put, well, it's up to you guys. You guys get to decide if that's something that we want to.
Do the virtual people get to vote or no?
Only if they have the cameras on.
Luckily.
But we have a quorum.
We do have, oh, that's right,
Quorum is
overrule
vote.
everybody, right?
We don't care.
Forget about,
We good to go.
we're good to go, forget that.
Help me out here, Caitlin, so we need
I
a motion.
propose- I have a motion
Oh,
that
yes.
we adopt the new 50% virtual meeting as our.
I'll second that. That's great.
As proposed by the management.
By the micromanaging state assembly.
With one detail, this doesn't have a date on it, so that we ought to specify what
As
it
of
is.
today.
Like when we're updating and like there should be a revised.
Yeah, I will do that. Yeah, this was I think this was approved in June of 2021. So it's definitely not been updated for a couple of years. Yeah. So Margaret made the motion.
Tim seconded.
Okay, perfect.
No, Biden.
And you will
Aye.
make sure that the records.
Yes, I will update, I'll add the date, I'll change the threshold, and then it has to be, I believe, yeah. And then
And
that
it's
will be,
that we're gonna vote on now.
yes, that's what we
Okay.
just voted on.
Could you send in our new schedule, or, because this overrides what we had previously said we were going to do, correct? In terms of meetings?
Well, we haven't
Did our
even-
schedule have virtual?
We've had a couple, but we actually haven't had any this year, so we could do even virtual if you guys. I mean, it's up to you guys. Usually, I mean, the way we've been kind of doing it is on an ad hoc basis, but we could create a schedule and stick to it.
I just couldn't remember.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did, last virtual meeting we had was in December.
Are we keeping the July meeting since it's right before Independence Day?
So we typically cancel the July meeting, and I mean, you guys usually
Oh,
vote
it's
on that,
scheduled August.
right? July and August, yeah, just because the fall is so busy. So if we could vote on that now, if you guys wanted to.
Sure. I'll make a motion
Jennifer motion.
I second that.
canceling June,
Yeah.
July, and August.
In favor, well, are we
Oh, wait.
canceling July?
July and August.
Yeah.
Correct.
Happy summer.
Yes.
In favor?
Alright.
Yeah, great.
And we, June,
And we,
are we doing virtual or coming in?
June will be virtual?
All
We could do virtual in June if you guys want.
Yeah.
That'd be helpful. Okay.
Love it.
Could I clarify, did you vote for the 50% and the camera on, or just the 50%?
I think
Camera has nothing
I
to
think
do
that
with it.
cameras on is a requirement.
Right.
Yes, we did vote for camera on,
Yeah.
because we had no choice.
We had to, right, we couldn't do.
Was it
all.
the 50% as well? I didn't
Yes.
understand the difference between the
I think
two.
it doesn't
We're
matter
just
about the
saying we'll go
camera.
along with what the county tells us to do.
Let's go. and
Yes.
that's probably-
Here goes Jennifer.
So I'm back. So I guess staff gets to police that. So at the next virtual meeting, if anyone's camera is off, we're gonna like call you out.
So I could wear a mask.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, you can.
Right, but yeah. No, I'm kidding. I'm just trying to figure out how this actually works in practice.
And somebody, one of the staff that was presenting did provide an interpretation that seemed reasonable, which was being virtual the point is to make it similar to being in the room, where if one of us gets up to go to the bathroom and a vote happens while they are out of the room, it's the same idea. Like, then they don't get to be part of that. So the same thing, if you are there at your desk on the computer and you need to step away, you just do not get to participate in any business that happens during that time. And so
But
it's
that's
kind
an
of, if you
assumption.
think about
because
it,
You turn your camera off and you're still, well, technically, you're still there. You don't want to be showing your face.
so that's where that like question about like if we just make sure everyone's on camera at a time of voting, so that was kind of the
Action.
Yeah. So I can't quote that, that's
Mandated.
just kind of an interpretation.
That
Yeah,
makes more sense.
Don't count.
Pragmatic.
Okay, so
I still
I
think this is
just
positive as
turned my
long as the guy
camera
gave us
off.
more virtual meetings.
yeah, I mean, right, I don't know. Okay, it's gonna be tough. I agree with Jennifer. It's gonna be very difficult to police. So I turned my camera off because I was tired of sitting and I got up and I paced back and forth. So in the future, you guys just get to see me
We don't
pacing
want
like
to
a tiger at the
Go
zoo.
ahead, do it.
Okay. I
And I'll
might,
cook dinner in front of everybody.
I know my camera will be on, but I'll be like, anyway, okay, sounds good.
So, Larry, was there any questions about an emoji face being put
I
on?
know. There's people who like there's foxes on Zoom.
So that wouldn't be unallowed.
She's always an
unallowed.
animal.
Or what if you had your own photo? Then you're on camera technically.
My screen froze for about an hour. and a half.
Exactly. I was here.
I don't, they just
Sounds
add
like
more
it's-
problems to
yeah.
the soup.
It sounds like
Uh,
it's
But
written-
Steve's right. It's progress. It's better than it was.
50% is good.
That was it.
So that was one item we talked about. We also talked about, they shared in hard copy and they promised to share electronically a updated Arlington County Advisory Group's
Oh,
handbook.
God, that's been outdated for the last 30 years.
Yeah, it sounds like they are welcoming review and comment on it from the committees. So they did ask that like the chairs gather that comment and organize it and send it to them. They said like they'd like to see it in about 6 weeks. So I'm assuming that I will receive an electronic copy of this, which I believe I can distribute and you all can
I would like that.
take a look at it and provide comment and then
I've been
send
complaining
back to
about
me
that
and
for
I'll
years.
organize it. I mean, it's relatively brief generally. It's
Yeah,
not
I mean,
super long, right?
There was
So-
no need to be
It's
outdated.
double-sided.
30 years.
It's just a bunch of pictures. There you go.
So there's that, expect that for me. And we talked a bit about best practices for public comment. And it sounded like they were going to develop some sort of training or resources for committees in terms of how to handle public comment. And there was some discussion about when public comment becomes potentially disruptive, because I guess there was a incident at one of the committees. They didn't share details. So that, no action on that, just that sounds like they're providing some resources.
And the camera has to be on.
Right. And then the last thing I think is Arlington 2050 visioning, and they handed me these postcards, which if anyone was at, I know Steve, you were at that that thing back in February where they talked about 2050 visioning, so you may have already done this, but the postcard asks you to say, here I am in the year 2050, and I want to tell you why Arlington is so fantastic. Getting here wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Here's how we did it. So
Talk about a padded.
I-
Where do bike lanes at?
Yeah.
Where do bike lanes?
haven't done it yet,
Flying cars.
I was going to ask, because there's nowhere on the card that explains where to put it. And I read in small print that they highly recommend that you do it
Jetson.
electronically. So there's a QR code.
QR code, okay.
So if you fill it out in hard copy, I don't know where to tell you to send it, but, so fill it
Send it
out.
to the town or libraries, all
QR
that boxes.
Yeah. Oh, are there?
Libraries.
Okay, okay.
Interesting, okay.
And Libby had said that they were open to like commission input. So for example, the Community Services Board, instead of a postcard, she recommended that the board come up with a statement and submit that.
Laura, who is our county board representative?
Maureen,
Okay.
as of what? This past-
It changed every year, right?
Yeah.
It was Takis last year?
Yeah.
And it's Maureen this year. Cool, okay.
Has she been invited to talk to us?
She was on the tour, but as far as coming in, talking with the group, I would definitely invite her.
I think that'll be good.
Actually, that might be better coming from you.
I guess.
Okay.
That's it?
I have a couple of things. Sorry.
Oh.
That's my brother.
Okay.
Early, okay.
I'm sorry.
Truth comes out.
Okay, so I have two updates. We have a tenant summit on June 8th. Jennifer, do you want to talk about where it is? Because I'm totally blanking.
Yes, but I have to go back on. So this is our second annual tenant summit. It'll be at Lubber Run on Saturday, June 8th. It's from 10 to noon, and we can send out the flyers. So we did it last year for the first time, and it was really well received. We talked about just sort of basic tenant rights and responsibilities, what to do if you have an issue. We had a panel of different county resources, sort of who to come to if you have a code issue or a vermin issue or whatever. And then the cool thing was we had a lot of providers come and people could actually come and do consultations. So you could come apply for like a housing grant, or you could talk to one of the legal services. So it was a really good, I think it was a good event. So if you want to come or you know anybody who wants to come, we would love to have you. And like I said, I'll send the flyer out via Caitlin.
And it's 10 to 1.
10 to 12, 10 to 2 or 10 to 12, Jennifer?
Just into 12.
what was the time on it?
Time?
Sorry, I'm stuck. Okay.
10
You know,
to
I
2.
actually think I lied. I said 10 to 12. I think it is 10 to 2.
Yeah. June 8th.
One more update. We were asked by HUD to do a visit with their regional administrator later in May. So the HUD regional administrator for this area oversees DC field office, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Richmond. I think that's it. And so we're going to be hosting them on May 21st at Terwilliger Place, which is a building that was supported with Home Investment Partnerships funding, which is another HUD funding source. And they're asking for a candid conversation about what works well and what doesn't work well with using HUD funds. So we are going to be talking about all of our programs on the community development and housing side, but also COC programs, the housing choice voucher program. So it's going to be an interesting event. We will report back how that goes. But it's a unique opportunity, so we're looking forward to it.
That's great.
Yeah.
I have one more thing.
Sure, go for it.
On the Arlington 2050 visioning, if we wanted to do this, I think, let me know if it's not okay. We could actually have a group committee discussion at a future meeting about, what we as CDCAC would vision, and potential opportunity. They were sort of encouraging committees to invite the public to some sort of event like this where we could have that conversation, or we could hear from other folks and from the perspective of CDCAC objectives and what we work on. So something to keep in mind for some point in the near future.
Do you know when they're looking for feedback by?
Let me look at this paper here. not say, and I don't recall the date.
I think it was a long time, like almost the end of the year.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, so we have some time to think through.
And Larry, you may want to just touch base with the Housing Commission, or I can circle up next week and just see if they want to do it jointly.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Just because I think there's gonna be a lot of crossover.
Right.
So that might be a thought.
Good idea.
I have one more question, and we're gonna let you guys go. Do you all want, so the Race to Rebuilding Trust NOFA, the recommendations came out, I think Tim mentioned that, a lot of duplication in terms of who received funding. Would you guys like an update from the staff? Yeah?
I think it'd be very
Yes.
useful.
Yeah.
All right, so we can invite them to, we'll invite them to the June meeting and see if they're.
Might also offer Caitlin before October, maybe in like the September timeframe, just a refresher as well. But I think it'd be really nice to hear from them and then just to understand what the distribution, be reminded of what the distribution looks like.
Okay.
Do they have, they released that, right? Because I know some people have already been notified that they received reports.
It was on All Now, yeah.
Okay, never mind. Well, we can cite that.
Yeah, there was and I can send that out to you guys, but there was a press release that went out. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Good.
Did we adjourn?
Adjourn.
Adjourn.
Booyah. Thank you.
Real this
Good
time.
job. Thank
We
you.
have been.
Thanks, bye.
Yeah, right.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, Steve. Bye.
Bye.
Oh.